The day I should have died, I had $18 in my pocket and a hole in my side big enough to see bone. A stranger found me bleeding out by Willow Creek. She could have taken the money and walked away. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she made a choice that changed both our lives forever. This is the story of how a dying cowboy and an abandoned woman found each other when they had nothing left to lose. The sun hung low over the Texas hills, painting the ranch in shades of amber and gold. Owen Caldwell sat in his favorite rocking chair on the wraparound porch, a tin cup of coffee cooling in his weathered hands. At 78 years old, his hair had gone completely silver, but his gray eyes still held the sharp clarity of a man who had spent decades reading the land, the sky, and the hearts of cattle and horses. His grandson, Tommy, 16 and restless with the particular energy of youth, leaned against the porch railing. The boy had been asking questions all afternoon. Questions about work, about life, about what it meant to be a man in a world that seemed to change faster than anyone could keep up with. Owen took a slow sip of his coffee and set the cup down on the small table beside him. The wood was smooth, worn by 40 years of weather and touch. Everything on this ranch told a story if you knew how to listen. Tommy Owen said, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of age and hard living. You asked me earlier why I never gave up, why I kept pushing through when times got rough. Let me tell you about the autumn of 1885. I was 38 years old then, thought my life was over, thought everything worth having had already come and gone. The boy straightened, sensing a story worth hearing. Turns out, Owen continued, I was wrong. That autumn was not an ending, it was a beginning, and it started the day I should have died. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle between them. You see, son, sometimes a man finds his purpose not in what he chases, but in what finds him when he least expects it. When he is broken down, when he has nothing left but his last breath and a prayer he is not sure anyone is listening to. Tommy pulled up a chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. Owen smiled faintly. This is a story about a cowboy and a woman who saved his life twice, once when he was dying, and once when he was living but did not want to anymore. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, he was no longer 78. In his mind, he was 38, riding across open Texas grassland under a September sky that promised rain. 4:30 in the morning. That was when Owen Caldwell woke every day, whether his body wanted to or not. The habit had been carved into him by 15 years of ranching, of building something from nothing, of proving to himself and to the land that he belonged here. The house was silent. It had been silent for 8 years. Owen sat up in bed, the mattress creaking beneath him. The room was large but empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. A dresser against one wall, a chair by the window, a wash basin on a small table, and on the nightstand beside the bed, a photograph in a silver frame. Catherine Morrison Caldwell. Kate. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was more handsome than pretty, though Owen had always thought her beautiful. Serious eyes that seemed to look through the camera and into whoever was looking back. The photograph had been taken on their wedding day in 1873, 12 years ago now. She had worn a simple white dress. He had worn the only suit he owned, borrowed from Kate's father because he could not afford one of his own. She had died in 1877, 4 years of marriage, 8 years of grief. Owen looked at the photograph for a long moment, then stood and began to dress. The routine never changed. Thick denim trousers worn soft from work, a wool shirt faded gray, leather boots that came up past his ankles, the kind that could take a beating from brush and rocks and angry cattle, a leather belt with a brass buckle, and his gun belt strapped low on his right hip, the weight of the Colt .45 reassuringly familiar. Out here you wore a gun the way you wore boots. It was not a choice. It was survival. He walked down the narrow stairs, the wood groaning under his weight. The house was well built, sturdy, meant to last generations. He had constructed it himself, board by board, nail by nail. For Kate. She had never lived in it. The kitchen was cold. Owen lit the stove with practiced efficiency, setting a pot of coffee to boil. No sugar, no milk. Just black, bitter coffee that tasted like earth and smoke. Cowboy coffee. While the water heated, he stood at the window and looked out over his land. Caldwell Ranch. 12,000 acres stretching from the limestone hills in the north to Willow Creek in the south. 500 head of Texas Longhorn cattle, tough as the land they grazed. 20 horses in the barn. 4 ranch hands living in the cabins near the stable, and Samuel Brooks, his foreman, who had been with him since the beginning. The sky was still dark, but the eastern horizon was beginning to pale. Dawn was coming. It always came whether you were ready for it or not. Owen poured the coffee into a tin cup and drank it standing, looking at the land he had built. He had bought the first 100 acres with borrowed money back in 1873, the year he married Kate. $500 at 15% interest, a debt that should have crushed him. Instead, it had forged him. He had cleared the brush himself, dug the fence post holes by hand, built the first barn with lumber he hauled from town on a wagon pulled by 2 mules. He had bought 50 Longhorn cattle with the last of his savings and learned to manage them through trial error and sheer stubbornness. The ranch had grown. The herd had multiplied. The debt had been paid off in 5 years. By 1880, Owen Caldwell was one of the most successful ranchers in 3 counties. But the house remained empty. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Boss Samuel Brooks called from outside. "You ready?" Owen drained the last of his coffee, set the cup in the basin, and grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. A Stetson light brown and sweat-stained the brim shaped by years of wear. Kate had given it to him on their wedding day. "Wear this," she had said, "so everyone knows you are mine." He opened the door to find Samuel standing on the porch, his own hat pulled low against the morning chill. Samuel was 60 years old, his hair gone completely gray, his face carved into deep lines by decades of sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp and his hands were still steady. "Morning, Sam," Owen said. "Morning." Samuel glanced at the gun on Owen's hip and shook his head. "You planning on going out alone again today?" Owen stepped past him and headed toward the barn. "Got 12 head missing near Willow Creek. Need to bring them back before the wolves get them." Samuel followed. "Let Jesse and Cole handle it. You have been working yourself into the ground, Owen. When is the last time you took a day off?" Owen did not answer. He did not need to. Samuel knew the answer as well as he did. Owen Caldwell did not take days off. Days off meant time to think, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling the weight of 8 empty years pressing down on him like a hand around his throat. They reached the barn, and Owen saddled Duchess, his chestnut mare. She was 6 years old, loyal and strong, though she spooked easily during storms. He checked the cinch, adjusted the stirrups, and tied his lasso to the saddle horn. Samuel stood nearby, arms crossed. "You remember the last time you went out to Willow Creek alone?" Owen swung up into the saddle. "I remember. Nearly got yourself killed by a pack of wolves. If Jesse had not come looking for you. That was 2 years ago, Sam, and I did not have my gun then." Samuel sighed. "You are as stubborn as a bull. You know that." Owen smiled faintly. "Kate used to say the same thing." Samuel's expression softened. "She would be angry with you if she knew you were still doing this." The smile faded from Owen's face. "Kate is gone, Sam. Has been for 8 years. What she would think does not matter anymore." He urged Duchess forward out of the barn and into the pale light of dawn. Samuel called after him. "Be back by supper, or I am sending the whole crew out looking for you." Owen raised a hand in acknowledgment, but did not look back. He rode north toward the hills, toward Willow Creek, toward the place where everything would change. He had worked as a cowboy for 15 years before owning this land. His hands knew the weight of a lasso, the give of good rope, the exact moment to release when a steer tried to bolt. He had branded more cattle than he could count, the smell of singed hide and the bawling of calves a familiar symphony. He had driven herds through dust storms and floods, had slept under stars with nothing but a saddle for a pillow and his gun within reach. This land had shaped him. The work had carved him. And even now, wealthy and successful, he rose every morning before dawn because a cowboy did not wait for the sun. He met it. Owen had not always been a rancher. He had not always owned land or cattle or a house built with his own hands. There had been a time when he owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a dream that seemed impossible. He had been born in Missouri in 1847, the eldest of 4 children. His father, Jonathan Caldwell, had been a farmer, a good man who worked hard and loved his family and died too young. He had been killed in 1863 during the war, shot in a skirmish that history forgot as soon as the smoke cleared. Owen had been 15 years old when his father died. His mother Martha had been left with 4 children and a failing farm. Owen, as the oldest, had done what needed to be done. He quit school. He worked the fields. He hunted game in the woods and sold the pelts in town. He did everything he could to keep his family fed. But it was not enough. Missouri was exhausted from war, the land stripped, and the people broken. By 1865, when Owen was 17, the farm was gone, sold to pay debts. Owen had made a decision then. He would go west, to Texas, where there was land and cattle and opportunity for a man willing to work. He left Missouri with $20 in his pocket and a promise to send money home as soon as he could. He arrived in Texas in the spring of 1865 and found work as a ranch hand. The pay was low, the work brutal, the hours endless. He learned to rope cattle, to break horses, to read the weather and the land. He learned to shoot, to fight, to survive. For 10 years he worked for other men. He saved every penny he could. He learned every skill a rancher needed, and he waited for his chance. That chance came in 1869 when he met Kate. Catherine Morrison was the daughter of William Morrison, who owned a ranch north of Cedar Springs. She was 22 years old with dark hair and blue eyes and a quiet intelligence that Owen found more captivating than beauty. She could read and write, which was rare for women on the frontier. She kept the books for her father's ranch managing accounts with a precision that impressed even the hardened cowboys who worked the land. Owen had been hired to work on Morrison's ranch in the spring of 1869. He was 22, lean and strong, with a reputation for being reliable. Kate noticed him first. She noticed that he did not drink his pay away in the saloon like the other men, that he saved his money, that he was polite, respectful, and worked harder than anyone else. One evening, after a long day of branding cattle, Kate brought a pitcher of water out to the corrals where Owen was washing up. She stood at the fence watching him. "You are different from the other men," she had said. Owen had looked up, surprised. "How so?" "You act like you are building something, like this is not just a job." Owen had smiled. "That is because it is not just a job. One day I will have my own ranch, my own land, and I will build a life worth living." Kate had handed him the pitcher. "I believe you." They were married 4 years later in the spring of 1873. Owen was 26. Kate was 25. Her father gave them his blessing and a piece of advice. "The land will test you," he said. "It will take everything you have and demand more. But if you are willing to give it, the land will give back." Owen took that advice to heart. He borrowed $500 from the bank and bought 100 acres of rough land near Willow Creek. The interest rate was 15%, a rate designed to break men who could not keep up. Owen refused to break. He built a small cabin first, just large enough for him and Kate. Then he started on the barn, then the fences. He worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Kate worked beside him, cooking, cleaning, keeping the books, managing the money, with the same precision she had shown at her father's ranch. In 1874 they bought their first 50 longhorn cattle. By 1875 the herd had grown to 80. By 1876, 120. The ranch was thriving. Owen started building the big house in 1876. A 2-story home with a wraparound porch, large windows, and enough rooms for the children they planned to have. He worked on it every spare moment, cutting and shaping every board, driving every nail. Kate would sit on the porch of the cabin and watch him work, a smile on her face. "This is going to be beautiful," she had said. "It is for you," Owen had replied. "All of it. Everything I build is for you." The house was finished in the spring of 1877. Owen had carried Kate over the threshold on a warm May afternoon, both of them laughing, planning, dreaming. 2 weeks later, Kate fell ill. Typhoid fever. It swept through Texas that summer like a plague, killing indiscriminately. Rich, poor, young, old. It did not matter. Kate grew weaker by the day. The doctor came, but there was nothing he could do. Owen sat by her bedside, holding her hand, praying to a God he was no longer sure was listening. Kate died on a Sunday morning in June. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. The world went on as if nothing had happened. Owen buried her himself, digging the grave by hand under a large oak tree on the hill overlooking the ranch. He built a wooden cross and carved her name into it. Catherine Morrison Caldwell, beloved wife. He stood at the grave for a long time after the last shovel of dirt had been placed. Then he walked back to the house. The empty house. The house he had built for her. The house she never truly lived in. For 8 years Owen had lived there alone. He worked. He expanded the ranch. He became successful, wealthy even. But the house remained empty. And so did he. Samuel had asked him once, "Are you living, Owen, or are you just slowly dying?" Owen had not answered. He did not know. The ride to Willow Creek took Owen through some of the most beautiful land in Texas. Rolling hills covered in yellow and brown grasses dotted with live oak and juniper trees. Limestone cliffs that glowed white in the morning sun. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and earth. Duchess moved at an easy pace, her hooves crunching on the dry ground. Owen kept one hand on the reins and the other resting on his thigh close to the colt on his hip. Out here you stayed ready. Wolves, coyotes, rattlesnakes. The land was beautiful, but it was not forgiving. By mid-morning the sky had begun to change. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and low. Owen could smell rain in the air, that particular metallic scent that came before a storm. He urged Duchess to move a little faster. Willow Creek was a narrow stream that wound through a rocky canyon lined with cedar and willow trees. The water ran clear over limestone, creating small pools where cattle liked to drink. Owen had lost 12 head here over the past 2 weeks, and he needed to find them before the wolves did. He spotted the cattle near a bend in the creek, grazing peacefully in a small meadow. 11 were fine. The 12th, a young steer, had managed to wedge itself between 2 large boulders near the water's edge, its hind leg caught. Owen dismounted and approached carefully. The steer was panicking, thrashing against the rocks, making the situation worse. Owen spoke in a low, calm voice, the way he always did with frightened animals. "Easy now, easy. I am here to help." He looped his lasso around the steer's neck and began to work it free, using his weight to shift the animal without injuring it further. The work was slow, careful. Then the thunder came. It was not a distant rumble. It was a crack, sharp and loud, right overhead. Duchess, tied to a nearby tree, reared up in terror. The rope snapped. The mare bolted. Owen barely had time to turn before a second crack of thunder shook the air. The steer thrashed violently. Owen's boot slipped on the wet limestone. He fell backward, his body twisting as he tried to catch himself. He hit the rocks hard. Pain exploded through his right side, a sharp, burning agony that stole his breath. He felt something tear, felt the warmth of blood spreading across his shirt. He tried to move, but his body would not obey. The world tilted, blurred. Owen lay on his back, staring up at the sky. Rain began to fall, cold drops hitting his face. He could hear the creek running beside him, could hear the distant sound of Duchess's hooves fading into the hills. He tried to call for help, but his voice came out weak, broken. "Sam, Sam, I need—" No one answered. No one was close enough to hear. Owen's hand moved to his side, pressing against the wound. Blood. Too much blood. He knew what that meant. He had seen men die from wounds like this. Slowly, painfully. He turned his head and saw his saddlebag lying a few feet away, its contents spilled across the rocks. Among them a small photograph in a leather case. Kate. Owen reached for it, his fingers trembling. He managed to pull it close, holding it against his chest. Her face looked back at him, serious and beautiful and gone. "I am sorry, Kate," he whispered. "I promised I would live longer than you. I promised." The rain fell harder. The world grew darker. Owen closed his eyes. 3 weeks earlier, Margaret Brennan had stepped off the train at Cedar Springs with a heart full of hope and a suitcase full of everything she owned. She was 27 years old, with brown hair pinned neatly under a simple hat and green eyes that had seen more hardship than most people twice her age. She wore a navy blue dress, clean, but worn the fabric showing its age at the cuffs and hem. In her hand she carried a single leather suitcase, and in the pocket of her coat a folded marriage certificate. The certificate bore 2 signatures, hers written in the careful script her mother had taught her at the kitchen table back in Pennsylvania, and his, William Hartley. A confident, sweeping signature she had never seen, made only received through 6 months of letters. Maggie stood on the platform as the train pulled away, leaving her alone in the fading light of a Texas afternoon. She counted 47 people who had disembarked with her. 46 were met by family, friends, lovers. 46 people had someone waiting. Maggie was the 47th. She waited for 10 minutes, scanning the faces of the few men still lingering near the station. None of them approached. None of them seemed to be looking for anyone. After 15 minutes, she picked up her suitcase and walked into the station house. An older man sat behind a wooden counter sorting papers. "Excuse me," Maggie said. "I am looking for someone. William Hartley. He was supposed to meet me here." The man looked up, his expression polite but uninterested. "Hartley. Do not know that name." Maggie's chest tightened. "He lives near here. He has a farm, 200 acres. He wrote to me. He sent me money for the train." The man shook his head slowly. "Miss, there is no one by that name within 50 miles of here. I have worked this station for 20 years. I know everyone." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stood there frozen, unable to speak. The man's expression softened slightly. "You one of those mail-order brides?" Maggie nodded, her throat too tight to form words. "I am sorry, miss. Happens more than it should. Men send letters, make promises, take money, and then disappear. You are not the first woman to come here looking for someone who does not exist." Maggie felt her hands begin to shake. She gripped the handle of her suitcase tighter, forcing herself to stay calm. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked out of the station. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Cedar Springs stretched before her, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith shop. Everything a frontier town needed and nothing Maggie wanted. She stood there for a long moment alone on the dusty street and allowed herself one full breath. Then she squared her shoulders and started walking. She tried 6 boarding houses. All of them turned her away. No references, no family, no guarantee she could pay. Finally, she found Mrs. Thornton, a thin, sharp-featured woman who ran a boarding house at the edge of town. "I have a storage shed out back," Mrs. Thornton said, looking Maggie up and down with cold appraisal. "Used to be for firewood. It is not much, but it is dry. $2 a month." Maggie had $8 left. $2 she agreed. The shed was exactly as described. 8 feet by 10 feet, no windows, dirt floor. It smelled of mold and old wood, but it had a door that closed, and that was more than Maggie had a moment ago. She set her suitcase down, spread her coat on the ground as a makeshift blanket, and sat. For the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, she allowed herself to cry. Not loud, wrenching sobs, just silent tears that slid down her cheeks and onto her folded hands. She cried for the money she had saved, for the hope she had carried, for the 6 months of letters that had painted a picture of a life she now knew never existed. Then she stopped. She wiped her eyes. She folded the marriage certificate and put it deep into her coat pocket, past the few coins she had left, into the darkness where she did not have to look at it. Tomorrow she would find work. Tomorrow she would begin again. Tonight she would sleep on a dirt floor and not let herself break. For 3 weeks Maggie lived in the shed and worked for Mrs. Thornton. Every morning she woke at 5, washed her face in the bucket of cold water behind the boarding house, and began her day. The work was brutal. Laundry for 8 rooms. Bed sheets, pillowcases, tablecloths, towels. Everything had to be scrubbed by hand in a copper tub filled with water and harsh lye soap. Maggie's hands cracked and bled within the first week. She wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from her spare underskirt and kept working. Mrs. Thornton paid her 60 cents a day, but only if the work was perfect, only if every sheet was spotless, every stain removed, every piece of fabric wrung dry and hung neatly on the line. Maggie learned quickly that perfection was the only option. She ate one meal a day, a piece of stale bread from the bakery, 5 cents, sometimes an apple if she could afford it. She drank water from the public well and told herself it was enough. At night she returned to the shed exhausted, her back aching, her hands burning. She lay on the dirt floor with her coat as a blanket and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep around her. The women of Cedar Springs whispered about her. She heard them when she walked to the general store, when she passed the church on Sunday mornings, when she stood in line at the bakery. That is the one. The mail-order bride who was left at the station. Poor thing. Must have been something wrong with her. Or she lied about her past. Men do not abandon women for no reason. Maggie kept her head down and said nothing. What could she say? They had already decided who she was. But there was one small mercy. On her second week in Cedar Springs, Maggie discovered feverfew growing wild along the banks of Willow Creek. The plant had small white flowers and a bitter smell, and it was valuable. The apothecary, Mr. Pruitt, paid 10 cents for a good bundle. Every evening after finishing her work for Mrs. Thornton, Maggie walked the 3 miles to Willow Creek and gathered feverfew. She tied the stems into neat bundles and brought them to Mr. Pruitt's shop the next morning. 10 cents here, 10 cents there. It was not much, but it stretched her wages just far enough to keep her alive. On the afternoon of her 21st day in Cedar Springs, Maggie walked to Willow Creek as usual, carrying a woven basket she had found discarded behind the general store. The sun was low, the air cooling. She worked her way along the creek bank, picking feverfew and placing it carefully in the basket. Then she saw the horse. A chestnut mare stood in the shallow water 20 feet away, drinking. The saddle was still on her back, silver conchos catching the fading sunlight. The reins dragged in the water, dark and wet. But there was no rider. Maggie stopped. A riderless horse meant trouble. Her father had always said that. A horse without a man means the man has found trouble, or trouble has found him. She should turn around, walk back to town, tell someone, let them handle it. But then she saw the boot. It was half hidden by a clump of grass near the water's edge. A good leather boot worn at the heel, but expensive once. Then the leg. Then the man lying face down, one arm stretched toward the creek as if he had been trying to reach the water. Maggie dropped her basket and ran. The smell hit her first. Copper and dirt and something raw. Blood. Maggie knelt beside the man and grabbed his shoulder, rolling him onto his back. His face was pale, slick with sweat despite the cool air. Dark hair going gray at the temples. A strong jaw covered in several days of stubble. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and uneven. And his shirt. His shirt was soaked through on the right side, the fabric torn, blood still seeping from a long, jagged wound along his ribs. Maggie pressed her fingers to his neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, faint, weak, but there. She pulled the torn fabric aside to see the wound more clearly, a gash 5 inches long running along the line of his ribs, deep enough to see the white of bone beneath, but not deep enough to have punctured anything vital. He had been lucky, if you could call this luck. Maggie looked around. The horse, the silver saddle, the fine wool coat bunched beneath him. This man had money, real money. She reached into his coat pocket, her hands shaking slightly. A wallet. Leather soft with age. She opened it. $18 in paper currency, more money than she had held in her hand since leaving Pennsylvania. Maggie stared at the bills. $18. 30 days of work. 30 days of not being hungry. 30 days of maybe, just maybe, finding a way out of that shed. Her hand closed around the wallet. She thought of William Hartley, of the $40 he had taken from her, of the 6 months of hope he had stolen, of the life he had promised and never intended to give. She could take this. The man was dying. Probably would not last another hour. No one would know. No one would blame her. She could take the money, walk away, and finally have something. Maggie looked down at the man's face. His eyes moved beneath the lids. His lips formed silent words. Kate. Kate, I am sorry. He was dreaming, or dying, or both. Maggie closed the wallet and put it back in his pocket. Then she pulled off her shawl, tore strips from the hem of her underskirt, and began to work. She washed the wound with water from the creek, cold and clear. The man groaned but did not wake. She crushed feverfew leaves between her palms the way her mother had taught her and packed the green paste into the gash. It would not heal him, but it might keep infection at bay long enough for someone with real medicine to help. She wrapped the strips of cloth tightly around his torso, using her weight to press down on the wound, slowing the bleeding. Her hands were steady now. Her mother had been a midwife back in Pennsylvania, and Maggie had learned young that panic helped no one. You worked. You focused. You did what needed to be done. But she could not carry him. The man weighed at least 180 pounds, and Maggie barely reached 120 herself. She would never make it 3 miles back to town with him on her shoulders. She needed another way. Maggie stood and walked to the mare. The horse shied away at first, nervous, but Maggie spoke softly the way she used to speak to the horses on her father's farm in Pennsylvania. "Easy, girl. Easy now. I am not going to hurt you." She reached out slowly, letting the horse smell her hand. After a moment the mare calmed. Maggie untied the saddle blanket and spread it on the ground beside the man. Then inch by inch she rolled him onto the blanket. He groaned with each movement, his face twisting in pain, but he did not wake. Maggie tied the corners of the blanket to the saddle horn, creating a makeshift travois. Then she took the reins and began to walk. The journey back to Cedar Springs took over 2 hours. The mare moved slowly, reluctant to drag the weight behind her. Maggie walked beside the travois, one hand on the reins, the other pressed against the man's shoulder to keep him from rolling off. The sun set. The sky turned purple, then black. Stars appeared overhead, cold and distant. Maggie's legs burned, her back ached, but she kept walking. By the time they reached the shed behind Mrs. Thornton's boarding house, it was past 8 o'clock. The streets were empty. Everyone was inside eating supper, settling into their evening routines. No one saw Maggie drag the man through the back door of the shed. No one saw her unhook the travois and pull him inch by painful inch onto the dirt floor. No one saw her tie the mare behind the stable, hidden in the shadows where no one would think to look. Maggie collapsed against the wall of the shed, gasping for breath. Her whole body shook from exertion and adrenaline. Then she looked at the man lying on her coat, blood soaking through the makeshift bandages, and realized she had just made a decision that would change everything. She had saved him. Now she had to keep him alive. Maggie worked by the light of a single candle. She had no lamp, no lantern, just a stub of wax she had found in the trash behind the church. First, she boiled water on the small stove Mrs. Thornton let her use behind the boarding house. She poured the water into a tin basin and let it cool just enough to touch. Then she returned to the shed and carefully removed the blood-soaked bandages. The wound looked worse in the candlelight. Angry and red, the edges pulled apart, but there were no red streaks running away from it. No smell of rot. That was good. That meant infection had not set in yet. Maggie cleaned the wound again, using the boiled water and strips of clean cloth. The man stirred his body, jerking a sound escaping his throat that was not quite a word. But he did not wake. She had no real medicine, no carbolic acid to disinfect, no laudanum to ease the pain. All she had was feverfew and yarrow and salt. She mixed the crushed leaves with a little boiled water, creating a thick paste, and packed it into the wound. Then she wrapped fresh bandages tightly around his torso and stepped back. The man lay still, his breathing shallow but steady. His face was pale, but not the gray-white of death. Not yet. Maggie sat back against the wall and let out a long breath. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them against her knees, forcing them to be still. What had she done? She had dragged a stranger into her shed, a man who might die, a man whose disappearance was probably already being noticed. And when people came looking when they found him here, what would they think? A woman alone hiding a man, a scandal waiting to explode. But what else could she have done? Left him to die. Maggie looked at the man's face, softened now by unconsciousness. He looked younger in sleep, or maybe just less burdened. The fever came around midnight. Maggie had been dozing her back against the wall when she heard him moan. She opened her eyes and saw him thrashing weakly, his hands clutching at the air. His skin was hot to the touch, burning. Maggie soaked a cloth in cool water and pressed it to his forehead. He did not calm. His head turned from side to side, his lips moving, forming words she could not quite hear. She leaned closer. "Kate. Kate, where are you? I am sorry. I am so sorry." His hand shot out, grabbing Maggie's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were still closed, but his grip was desperate. "Do not leave me," he whispered. "Do not leave like she did." Maggie felt her throat tighten. She gently pried his fingers loose and held his hand between both of hers. "I am here," she said softly. "You are safe. I am not leaving." His grip loosened. His breathing slowed. He sank back into fever dreams, but his hand stayed in hers. Maggie sat there beside him, holding the hand of a man whose name she did not even know, and wondered what would happen when the sun came up. Morning came gray and slow through the cracks in the shed walls. Maggie had not truly slept, only dozed in fits and starts, jerking awake every time the man's breathing changed or his fever spiked. Now, with pale light filtering through the gaps in the wood, she could see him more clearly. The fever had broken some time before dawn. His skin was still warm but no longer burning. His breathing had steadied into a deeper, more natural rhythm. The bandages were stained dark with blood, but when Maggie checked them, she found the bleeding had stopped. She sat back on her heels and allowed herself a moment of relief. He would live, at least through today. But that created a new problem. A living man would wake, and when he woke, he would have questions. Maggie stood slowly, her body protesting after a night spent on the dirt floor. She needed medicine, real medicine. The feverfew had done its work, but infection could still set in. She needed carbolic acid to clean the wound properly. Laudanum for the pain that would come when he woke. She counted her money. 73 cents, 2 quarters from Mrs. Thornton, 2 dimes saved from the week before, 3 pennies she had found in the street. It was everything she had in the world. Maggie tucked the coins into her apron pocket and slipped out of the shed. The morning air was cool, carrying the smell of wood smoke and coffee from the boarding house. She walked quickly through the empty streets toward the apothecary. Mr. Pruitt's shop smelled of camphor and dust and something bitter underneath. Glass jars lined the shelves behind the counter, filled with powders and liquids whose names Maggie did not know. Mr. Pruitt himself was a thin man with spectacles that seemed too large for his narrow face. He looked up when Maggie entered, his expression polite but distant. "Miss Brennan, you are out early." "Yes, sir. I need carbolic acid and laudanum. Small bottles." Mr. Pruitt's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That is a particular combination. Treating something serious." Maggie kept her face carefully neutral. She had learned this trick from watching her mother deal with nosy neighbors back in Pennsylvania. "I found a drifter out by the creek yesterday evening. Took a bad fall. I figured Christian charity called for doing what I could." A drifter. Mr. Pruitt reached for the jars on the shelf behind him, his movements slow and deliberate. The charitable thing would be to bring him to Dr. Hammond. "Dr. Hammond charges $2 just to look at a man. I have 73 cents to my name." Mr. Pruitt paused, his hand on a brown glass bottle. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite sympathy, but something in the same neighborhood. "Carbolic acid is 25 cents. Laudanum is 40. That is 65 total." Maggie reached into her apron and drew out the coins, laying them on the counter one by one. 2 quarters side by side, 2 dimes below them, 3 pennies in a row at the bottom, 65 cents. 8 cents would be left. 8 cents between her and nothing at all. Mr. Pruitt swept the coins into his hand and dropped them into the till with a small rattle. He wrapped the bottles in brown paper and tied the package with string. "Miss Brennan," he said as she turned to leave. She stopped. "Christian charity is a fine thing, But a woman alone ought to be cautious about who she takes in. There are folks in this world who would take advantage of a kind heart. Maggie looked at him over her shoulder. I am always cautious, Mr. Pruitt. I learned that lesson the hard way. She walked out into the morning sun, the small package clutched against her chest. When she returned to the shed, the man was still unconscious, but he had shifted slightly as if seeking a more comfortable position. Maggie set the package down and knelt beside him. She unwrapped the bandages carefully, studying the wound in the better light. It looked cleaner than it had last night. The feverfew had done its job. She uncapped the carbolic acid and poured it onto a clean cloth. This would hurt. Even unconscious, the man's body would react to the burning sting of disinfectant. Maggie pressed the cloth to the wound. The man's entire body went rigid. His back-arched tendons standing out in his neck, and a sound escaped through his clenched teeth that was somewhere between a groan and a scream. But he did not wake, did not pull away. Maggie counted to 10, then lifted the cloth. She applied fresh bandages, wrapping them snugly around his torso. When she was finished, she sat back and studied his face. He was handsome, she realized, in a rugged, weathered way. The kind of face that came from years of outdoor work of sun and wind and hard living. There were lines around his eyes and mouth lines that suggested he had smiled often once, though they seemed etched deeper on one side as if smiling had become harder over time. Maggie reached for his coat folded in the corner where she had left it. The fabric was good quality wool, the kind that cost money. She checked the inside pocket. The wallet was still there. $18 untouched. But there was also a name sewn into the lining. Owen Caldwell. Maggie stared at the name. Owen Caldwell. It meant nothing to her. But as she continued searching the pockets, she found papers, documents. One was a deed. Caldwell Ranch, 12,000 acres. 12,000 acres. Maggie's hand trembled slightly as she unfolded another paper. A contract with a cattle buyer. 500 head of longhorn. The numbers were staggering. This was not just a cowboy. This was not even just a ranch foreman. Owen Caldwell owned one of the largest ranches in the county, maybe in 3 counties, and she had him hidden in her shed. Maggie carefully refolded the papers and put them back in the coat. She was about to set it aside when something else fell out, a photograph in a small leather case. She opened it. A woman looked back at her. Not young, maybe 30 or so when the photograph was taken. Dark hair pulled back severely from a serious face. Handsome rather than pretty, with eyes that looked directly at the camera with an intensity that was almost unsettling. At the bottom of the case in careful script were the words Catherine Morrison Caldwell, 1873. His wife, or widow perhaps. Maggie closed the case and put it back in the coat pocket. She sat for a long moment staring at the unconscious man, trying to reconcile what she knew now with what she had done. She had saved the richest rancher in the county, a man who could afford the best doctors, the best care, a man whose disappearance was almost certainly causing a massive search, and there was undoubtedly a reward for finding him. Maggie had heard the whispers in town over the past few days. Owen Caldwell was missing. His ranch hands were searching. There was talk of $50 for information leading to his whereabouts. $50, nearly 3 months of wages. Maggie looked at the wallet again. $18 inside, $50 reward, $68 total. Enough to leave Cedar Springs, enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere no one knew her as the abandoned mail-order bride. She reached for the wallet, her fingers hovering over the leather. Then she heard a sound. The man Owen was stirring. His eyelids fluttered. His hand moved to his side, touching the bandages, his face tightening in pain. Maggie pulled her hand back and waited. Owen's eyes opened, gray eyes clouded with pain and confusion. They moved around the small space, taking in the dirt floor, the rough walls, the single candle burning low. Then they found Maggie. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "Where am I?" Owen's voice came out, rough, scraped, raw. He swallowed and tried again. "What is this place?" "My place," Maggie said quietly. "Such as it is. A shed behind Mrs. Thornton's boarding house at the edge of town." Owen's gaze traveled the space again, lingering on the horse blanket beneath him, the cracked mirror in the corner, the single suitcase against the wall. "Your place," he repeated slowly, and something in his tone suggested he understood exactly what that meant. "Who are you?" he asked. "Maggie Brennan." She set down the cloth she had been holding. "Who are you?" A pause. She watched him weigh the question, decide what to give. "Owen," he said finally. "Just Owen. Just Owen." Maggie's tone was neutral, for now. Another pause longer this time. His jaw tightened, the muscle working beneath the stubble. "Just Owen." For now, he agreed. She held his gaze for 3 heartbeats, then turned to the makeshift shelf where she had placed the medicine bottles. "Well, just Owen, you were in a bad way when I found you. Gash along your ribs deep but clean enough. I do not reckon any organs got hit. You lost considerable blood, though. How long have I been here?" "Since yesterday afternoon. Your fever broke a few hours ago." Owen looked down at the bandages wrapped around his torso, touched them gingerly with his fingertips, winced. "You did this?" "The bandaging. My mother was a midwife back in Pennsylvania. She taught me enough to be useful." He raised his eyes to hers again. Something in his expression had shifted. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. "Thank you," he said. "For the trouble. For the medicine." Maggie's jaw tightened slightly. "I did not ask for payment." "I know." Owen took the tin cup of water she offered, their fingers carefully not touching. "That is why I am offering." She watched him drink, watched the way his hand trembled slightly holding the cup, weaker than he wanted to show, hurting more than he would admit. When the cup was empty, she took it back and refilled it from the bucket, setting it within his reach. "The carbolic acid needs to go on the wound again this evening. It will sting. I have had worse. I doubt that considerably." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Owen's mouth. It did not quite make it to his eyes. Maggie knelt beside him and began unwrapping the bandages. The wound looked better. Still angry, still raw, but the edges had begun to close. No red streaks radiating out from it. No smell of infection. She uncapped the carbolic acid and poured it onto a fresh cloth. Ready. Owen gripped the horse blanket beneath him, his knuckles going white. "Go ahead." She pressed the cloth to the wound. His whole body went rigid again, every muscle locked tight, but he did not pull away, did not cry out. He simply held himself perfectly still until she lifted the cloth and began applying fresh bandages. "Done," she said. Owen released a breath he had been holding. His face had gone gray, sheened with fresh sweat. "Thank you." Maggie wiped her hands on her apron and stood. "There is broth warming on the stove. Bone broth. Not much, but it will help build your strength back. You have done enough already. More than enough. I will be the judge of that." She moved to the small coal oil stove where a pot sat over a low flame. The broth was thin, made from bones she had begged from the butcher, but it was hot and nourishing. She ladled some into a tin bowl and pressed it into Owen's hands before he could refuse. Owen looked at the bowl, then at her, then at the shed around them. His expression was difficult to read. Why, he asked quietly. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Maggie stood over him, arms crossed. "I found you dying in a creek. Did not seem right to leave you there. Some folks would have. I am not some folks." She turned away, busying herself with the medicine bottles, giving him privacy to eat. Behind her she heard the soft sound of him drinking the broth, the tin bowl settling on the dirt floor. Then his voice quieter than before. "The coat. My wallet is in the inside pocket." Maggie stiffened. "You looked through it. I know you did. Anyone would." She did not turn around. Her hands stayed busy arranging bottles that did not need arranging. "But the money is still there," Owen continued. "All $18. Maggie finally looked at him over her shoulder. "I am not a thief, Mr. Owen." "I know." Owen held her gaze steadily. "That is exactly what I am trying to say. Thank you for that, too." She watched him for a long moment, trying to understand what he was not saying. Then she reached for the laudanum bottle and measured out a careful dose into the tin cup. "Get some rest. The laudanum will help with the pain, but sleep will do more." Owen drank it without argument, settling back against the wall. His eyes were already growing heavy. "Margaret Brennan," he murmured as the drug pulled him under. "I will not forget that name." "You do that," she said softly. She watched him drift into sleep, his breathing evening out, the lines of pain softening in his face. Then she sat on her suitcase, counting what remained. 8 cents, a half-full bottle of carbolic acid, a stranger who owed her his life and offered money she would not take. And somewhere out there, someone named Samuel was waiting for news of a man who had never come home. 3 days passed in a careful routine. Maggie worked for Mrs. Thornton during the day, returning to the shed in the evening to change Owen's bandages and feed him bone broth. Owen slept most of the time, his body focusing its energy on healing. When he was awake, they spoke little. Maggie asked no questions about who he was or where he came from, and Owen offered no information. But on the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. Maggie was hanging laundry behind the boarding house when she heard horses approaching, 3 riders moving at an easy pace down the main street. She recognized the lead rider immediately. Samuel Brooks, Owen's foreman. She had seen him in town before, though they had never spoken. Samuel was a man in his 60s with gray hair and a face carved by decades of Texas sun. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. The 2 men with him were younger, ranch hands by the look of them. They stopped at the front of the boarding house, and Maggie heard Samuel call out to Mrs. Thornton, "Excuse me, ma'am. We are looking for a man. Owen Caldwell. Has anyone here seen him or heard anything?" Maggie froze, her hands gripping a wet sheet. Mrs. Thornton's voice carried from the front porch. "Owen Caldwell." The rancher. "No, sir, but we do not get much traffic here. Just my regular boarders and the girl who rents the shed out back." "The girl in the shed." Samuel's interest sharpened. "Who is that Margaret something?" "Brennan, I think. She keeps to herself. Came to town about 3 weeks ago. Quiet. Does not cause trouble. Has she been around the past few days?" "Every day. She does laundry for me." "Why? You think she knows something?" "No, ma'am. Just asking everyone. Thank you for your time." Maggie heard the horses move on, but her heart continued to pound. Samuel was asking questions, and sooner or later those questions would lead him to her shed. She needed to talk to Owen. When she returned to the shed that afternoon, Owen was sitting up. It was the first time he had managed to do so without help. His face was pale and drawn with effort, but he had done it. Getting stronger, Maggie observed, setting down a bowl of broth. "Slower than I would like. You had a hole in your side 3 days ago. Slow is how it is supposed to go." She crossed the small space and handed him the bowl. Owen took it, his hands steadier today than yesterday. "Your grandmother sounds wise." She was. She also used to say the Lord did not make oak trees in a day, and he will not mend a stubborn man any faster. Something that might have been a smile crossed Owen's face. Fair point. Maggie moved to the corner where she had piled the dirty bandages, began sorting them. Some could be boiled clean and used again. Others were too far gone. "They were searching for you today," she said without looking at him. "Samuel Brooks. He came to the boarding house asking questions." She heard Owen go still behind her. "Did he talk to you?" "No. But he talked to Mrs. Thornton. Asked if anyone unusual had been around." "What did she say?" "That the only unusual person was me. The woman who rents the shed." Owen was quiet for a long moment. "You should tell them," he said finally. "Tell them I am here. Collect whatever reward they are offering." Maggie turned to face him. "If I wanted the reward, I would have already gone to the sheriff." "Then why have you not?" She met his gaze steadily. "Because you asked me not to. The first night when you were barely conscious, you said not to tell anyone you were here." Owen's expression shifted. "I said that—" "You did, and I figured you had your reasons." Owen set the bowl aside, his movements careful. "I do." He paused, clearly weighing how much to tell her. "If people know a woman has been hiding me, caring for me alone in this shed for days, what do you think they will say?" Maggie felt her stomach tighten. She had not thought about that. Or maybe she had somewhere in the back of her mind, but had pushed it away. "They will say I am a woman of loose character," she said quietly. "They will destroy your reputation," Owen said bluntly. "You are already known as the abandoned mail-order bride. If this gets out, you will never be able to show your face in this town again. So what do you suggest? Give me 2 more days. By then, I will be strong enough to ride. I will go back to my ranch and tell them I survived on my own, that I found shelter in a cave, that I never saw you. You would lie for me. To protect you, yes." Owen's voice was firm. "You saved my life, Miss Brennan. The least I can do is protect your name." Maggie studied him for a long moment. This man who had been a stranger 4 days ago. This man who had every reason to tell the truth and every reason to let her face the consequences of her own choices. 2 more days, she agreed. "But you have to promise me something. Anything. You have to keep your word. You have to go back, and you have to protect my name, even if it means lying." Owen met her eyes. "A cowboy's word is his bond, Miss Brennan. I promise." The next 2 days passed in a strange intimacy born of necessity. Maggie changed Owen's bandages 3 times a day, her hands growing familiar with the landscape of scars and muscles that made up his torso. She helped him sit up, then stand, then take a few halting steps around the small shed. She fed him bone broth and water and watched as color slowly returned to his face. And they talked. Not at first. The first day they barely spoke beyond what was necessary. But by the second day, as Owen grew stronger and the immediate danger of infection passed, the silence became uncomfortable. So they filled it. Owen asked about Pennsylvania. Maggie told him about Allentown, about the coal country, about her father's small farm, and her mother's work as a midwife. She told him about the textile mill where she had worked before deciding to come west. She did not tell him about William Hartley, not yet. Maggie asked about the ranch. Owen told her about Caldwell Ranch, about the 12,000 acres, about the 500 head of cattle, and the hard work of building something from nothing. He told her about learning to be a cowboy, about breaking horses and fixing fences and reading the weather. He did not tell her about Kate, not yet. On the evening of the 6th day, as Maggie prepared to leave the shed to sleep in her usual corner, Owen spoke. "Miss Brennan." "Maggie, may I ask you something?" She paused at the door. "You may ask. The man you came here to marry, William Hartley." "What happened?" Maggie's hand tightened on the doorframe. "How do you know about that small town?" "People talk, and Mrs. Thornton mentioned it the other day when Samuel was here." Maggie turned to face him. "There is not much to tell. I answered an advertisement in a Pennsylvania newspaper. A man seeking a wife. We wrote letters for 6 months. He sent me $40 for the train ticket and a marriage certificate already signed on his end. Said it would make things proper when I arrived. And when you arrived, he was not there." No one in Cedar Springs had ever heard of William Hartley. Either he never existed, or he took one look at me getting off that stage and decided he had made a mistake. Owen's expression darkened. He should be horsewhipped. But he is not here, and I am. So that is the end of it. Owen studied her face in the dim candlelight. "How long ago 3 weeks comes Sunday? And you have been here since, in this shed. It is honest work. It is mine." Maggie's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. Owen nodded slowly, and something in his expression suggested respect. "You are stronger than most men I know, Miss Brennan." Maggie felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. She was not used to compliments, especially not from men. "Get some rest, Mr. Caldwell. Tomorrow you go home." Tomorrow, Owen agreed. "And then I am going to find a way to repay what you have done. Not with money I can see that will not work, but somehow, some way that matters." Maggie did not respond. She simply stepped out into the night and closed the door behind her. The 7th morning arrived with the sound of horses. Heavy hoofbeats, multiple riders moving with purpose down the back alley behind the boarding house. Maggie woke instantly, her body going rigid with alarm. She was still lying on the ground outside the shed, having fallen asleep there some time after midnight. Now she scrambled to her feet and pressed herself against the wall, listening. The horses stopped. Boots hit the ground. Then Samuel Brooks's voice loud and clear. "Owen Caldwell." If you are here, answer me." Maggie's blood ran cold. She looked at the shed door, locked from the outside. Owen was trapped inside. She heard more footsteps. Mrs. Thornton's voice. "What is going on out here?" "We have reason to believe Owen Caldwell might be in that shed," Samuel said. "We need to search it. That shed is rented to Miss Brennan. You cannot just—" "Ma'am, with respect, Owen Caldwell has been missing for 7 days. If there is any chance he is alive, I am going to find him. Now you can give me the key or I can break down the door." Maggie made a decision. She stepped out from the shadows. "There is no need to break anything," she said. Samuel turned his hand, dropping to the gun at his hip out of pure instinct. Then he saw her and relaxed slightly. "Miss Brennan, Mr. Brooks." Maggie kept her voice steady. "What can I do for you? I need to search that shed. There is no one in there but me. Then you will not mind if I look." Maggie met his gaze. "I mind very much. But I understand you have a job to do." She pulled the key from her apron pocket and unlocked the door. Samuel stepped past her, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The shed was exactly as Maggie had left it. Her suitcase in the corner, the horse blanket on the floor, the small stove, the cracked mirror, and Owen Caldwell sitting against the far wall looking directly at Samuel with clear, steady eyes. Samuel stopped dead. For a long moment no one moved. Then Samuel let out a breath that sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. "Sweet, merciful heaven. Owen. Hello, Sam." Samuel crossed the shed in 3 strides and dropped to one knee beside Owen. "We thought you were dead." 7 days. "Owen, 7 days. I know. I am sorry." Samuel's eyes moved from Owen's face to the bandages around his torso to Maggie standing in the doorway. "She did this. She has been hiding you here." Owen held up a hand. "It is not what you think, Sam." "Then what is it? Because right now I am thinking a woman found my boss injured, and instead of getting him help, she has been keeping him in a shed." His voice was not angry, just confused and concerned. Maggie stepped forward. "I found him at Willow Creek 7 days ago. He was bleeding to death. I did what I could with what I had. You should have brought him to town, to the doctor. I could not carry him, and I could not leave him to die while I ran for help, so I did the only thing I could. I brought him here, and I kept him alive." Samuel looked between them, trying to piece together what he was seeing. "And Owen, you have been conscious for how long?" "Since the 4th day," Owen said. "And you did not send word. Shout for help." Samuel's confusion was giving way to frustration. "We have had every man on the ranch searching for you." "I know," Owen said quietly. "And I am sorry. But I asked Miss Brennan not to tell anyone. Why in God's name would you do that?" "Because Owen said, looking directly at Samuel, if people knew a woman had been hiding me, caring for me alone in this shed, what would they say about her?" Understanding dawned on Samuel's face. His expression shifted, the frustration melting into something sadder and more resigned. "They would say she was—" Owen nodded. "Exactly. Miss Brennan has already suffered enough at the hands of this town's gossip. I was not about to make it worse." Samuel stood slowly. He looked at Maggie with new eyes. "You saved his life." "I did what anyone should do. Not anyone." Samuel's voice was firm. "Most people would have taken what they could and left him, or gone for the reward money and to hell with the consequences. You did neither." "I am not most people," Maggie said quietly. Samuel turned back to Owen. "Can you ride? Give me a hand up and we will find out." Samuel helped Owen to his feet. Owen swayed slightly but held steady. His face was pale but his jaw was set with determination. "We ride back now," Samuel said. "We tell everyone you survived on your own, found shelter, treated your own wounds. No mention of Miss Brennan." Owen nodded. "That is the story." Samuel looked at Maggie one more time. "Thank you, Miss Brennan. I do not know how to repay what you have done. You do not owe me anything." Maggie's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly at her sides. "Just take care of him." "Oh, I intend to," Samuel said. "But something tells me this is not over." He was right. It was not over. It had only just begun. They left within the hour. Samuel brought a wagon instead of horses, padding the bed with blankets so Owen could lie down if the pain became too much. Owen insisted on sitting up. Before climbing into the wagon, Owen turned to Maggie one last time. They stood in the narrow alley behind the boarding house, the morning sun just beginning to warm the day. "I meant what I said," Owen told her. "I am going to find a way to repay you. You do not need to. We are square." "No," Owen said firmly. "We are not. You gave me my life back, Miss Brennan. That is not a debt that can be paid with money or words. It is a debt that requires action. What kind of action I do not know yet, but I will figure it out." He paused. "Do you have enough money, I mean, to survive until what?" Maggie's voice was harder than she intended. "Until someone else decides to marry me sight unseen, until this town decides I am worth something." Owen flinched slightly. "I did not mean—" "I know what you meant. And yes, Mr. Caldwell, I have enough. I always have enough. Because I work for what I have, and I do not expect charity from anyone. It would not be charity." "Yes," she said quietly, "it would be. And I have had enough of that to last me a lifetime." Owen opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He nodded slowly. "All right. But the offer stands. If you ever need anything—" "I will remember," Maggie said, though both of them knew she would not ask. Samuel called from the wagon. "Owen, we need to go. Mrs. Walsh is probably beside herself with worry." Owen climbed into the wagon with Samuel's help, moving carefully, his hand pressed to his wounded side. Once seated, he looked back at Maggie one more time. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Maggie nodded but said nothing. She watched the wagon roll down the alley and onto the main street, watched it disappear around the corner heading north toward Caldwell Ranch. Then she was alone again in the alley behind Mrs. Thornton's boarding house. Alone with 8 cents to her name and a shed that suddenly felt emptier than it had before Owen Caldwell had occupied it. She went inside, closed the door, and sat on her suitcase. The space where Owen had lain was still visible, the dirt floor compressed from his weight. The blanket was folded neatly in the corner. The tin cup and bowl sat by the stove, washed and ready. For 7 days this shed had held 2 people. Now it held 1 again. Maggie pulled the marriage certificate from her coat pocket, unfolded it carefully. William Hartley's signature stared back at her as confident and false as the day it had been written. She had saved a man's life. A good man, if she was any judge. A man who had promised to protect her reputation even at the cost of lying. But she was still alone, still living in a shed, still the woman Cedar Springs knew as the abandoned mail-order bride. Nothing had changed, except that for 7 days she had not been alone. And now that she was, the silence felt heavier than it ever had before. 2 days passed like water through a sieve. Maggie worked, slept, ate her single meal, and tried not to think about the empty space in the shed where Owen Caldwell had lain. She tried not to think about his gray eyes, or his steady voice, or the way he had looked at her like she mattered. She failed at not thinking about these things. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, Jesse Martinez appeared at Mrs. Thornton's boarding house. He was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and the lean build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. He held his hat in his hands and looked uncomfortable standing on a woman's doorstep. "Miss Brennan." He spotted Maggie hanging laundry in the backyard. "I have something for you." Maggie set down the wet sheet she was holding and walked toward him, wiping her damp hands on her apron. "What is it?" Jesse reached into his vest pocket and pulled out an envelope. "From Mr. Caldwell. He asked me to deliver it personal." Maggie took the envelope. It was sealed with wax, the paper thick and expensive. "Thank you." Jesse shifted his weight. "He also wanted me to wait for an answer, if you have one." Maggie looked at the envelope, then at Jesse. "Tell him I will think about it. But you have not read it yet." "I do not need to read it to know what it says," Maggie replied. "But I will read it anyway, out of courtesy." Jesse nodded slowly, clearly, unsure how to respond to that. "I will be at the saloon for the next hour. If you have an answer before then, you can find me there." He put his hat back on and walked away. Maggie stood in the yard holding the envelope, feeling its weight. She could guess what was inside. Money, probably. or another offer of help that was really charity dressed up in polite words. She should throw it away unread, should tell Jessie there was no answer, should make it clear to Owen Caldwell that she wanted nothing from him. Instead, she opened it. The letter was short, written in a masculine hand that struggled with the flourishes of formal penmanship. The letters were uneven, some too large, some cramped together, but readable. Miss Brennan, I am not good with words on paper. Samuel says I write like a cow kicked over the inkwell. But there are things I need to say, and I cannot say them in person yet. Doctor's orders. You saved my life. Not because you wanted something from me, not because you expected payment or reward. You did it because you are a good person, and good people are rare enough that when you meet one, you pay attention. I need a housekeeper, someone to help Mrs. Walsh run the house. She is getting on in years and cannot manage everything alone anymore. $15 a month, room and board included. Your own space, a real room with a real bed and a door that locks. This is not charity. This is work. Real work for real pay. I need someone I can trust in my house, and I trust you because you have already proven who you are. Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock. I will be at Willow Creek, where you found me. If you come, we can talk. If you do not come, I will understand. But I hope you come. Owen Caldwell. Maggie read the letter twice, then a third time. $15 a month. That was more than she made in 2 months of laundry work. Room and board meant no more shed, no more sleeping on a dirt floor. A real bed, a door that locked. But it also meant working for Owen Caldwell, seeing him every day, living in his house, accepting something that no matter how he phrased it, felt like charity. Maggie folded the letter and tucked it into her apron pocket. She found Jessie at the saloon an hour later, nursing a beer at the bar. Tell Mr. Caldwell, she said, that I will think about it. Jessie set down his beer. That is all. Just that you will think about it. That is all. He is going to ask what that means. It means exactly what I said. Maggie met his eyes steadily. I will think about it. Jessie nodded slowly. All right, Miss Brennan. I will tell him. Maggie walked back to the boarding house, the letter burning a hole in her pocket. That night, lying on the dirt floor of the shed, she read it again by candlelight. $15 a month. A real room. A door that locks. But more than that. I trust you, he had written, because you have already proven who you are. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever looked at what she had done and decided it meant something about who she was rather than what she wanted. Maggie blew out the candle and lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of Cedar Springs settling into sleep around her. Tomorrow was Saturday. Sunday, 2 o'clock, Owen would be at Willow Creek. She had a day and a half to decide. Sunday arrived clear and cool. Maggie woke early, did her minimal washing up, and put on her navy blue dress, the same dress she had worn when she arrived in Cedar Springs 5 weeks ago. It was still her best dress, which was not saying much. She stood in front of the cracked mirror, trying to make herself presentable. Her hair had grown longer, the ends uneven because she could not afford a proper cut. Her face was thinner than it had been in Pennsylvania, her cheekbones more prominent. Hard work and scarce food had carved away anything soft, but her eyes were steady. That had not changed. At 1:30, Maggie left the shed and began walking toward Willow Creek. The walk took 40 minutes. She had time. The creek looked different in the midday sun than it had that evening 5 weeks ago when she had found Owen dying on its banks. The water ran clear and bright over smooth stones. Willow trees grew thick along the edges, their long branches trailing in the current. Feverfew still grew in clusters, white flowers bobbing in the breeze. Owen was already there. He stood near the water's edge, his back to her, looking out over the creek. He wore dark trousers, a clean white shirt, and a leather vest. His hat was pulled low against the sun. Even from a distance, Maggie could see he moved carefully, favoring his right side. She stopped at the tree line, suddenly uncertain. This man was a stranger. Yes, she had saved his life. Yes, she had cared for him for 7 days. But she did not know him. Not really. She did not know if she could trust him. Then Owen turned and saw her. His face changed, something lighting up in his expression that made him look younger. "You came," he said. "I was curious," Maggie replied. She walked toward him, her boots crunching on the dry grass. Owen smiled faintly. "Just curious. Mostly." They stood 3 feet apart, the creek running between them and the place where everything had started. Owen looked healthier than he had 5 days ago. Color had returned to his face, and though he still moved carefully, he stood straight. "How is the wound?" Maggie asked. "Healing. Dr. Hammond says another 2 weeks and I should be back to full strength." He paused. He also asked who bandaged it so well. I told him I did it myself. "Did he believe you?" "No." But he did not press. "Samuel vouched for my story." Maggie nodded. "Good." They fell into an awkward silence. Owen seemed to be searching for words. Maggie waited. "I meant what I said in the letter," he finally began. "I need a housekeeper. This is not charity. It is work." Maggie crossed her arms. "Why me?" "There are plenty of women in Cedar Springs who would take that job. Women with experience managing large households. Women with references." "Because I do not trust them," Owen said bluntly. "I trust you. You do not know me." Owen shook his head. "I know the important things. I know you found a dying man, and instead of taking his money and leaving him, you saved him. I know you spent your last 73 cents on medicine for a stranger. I know you slept on a dirt floor for 7 nights so I could have the only blanket." He paused. "That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Maggie looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. "What if I am not good at being a housekeeper? What if I make mistakes? Then you will learn, same as everyone else." The creek burbled over the stones. A bird called from somewhere in the willow trees. "What about the town?" Maggie asked quietly. "What will people say when you hire the abandoned mail-order bride to work in your house?" "They will say whatever they want to say. They always do." Owen's voice was firm. "But I do not live my life based on what other people think, Miss Brennan. And I hope you do not either." Maggie felt something shift inside her chest. A wall she had built brick by careful brick beginning to crack. "I will not lie to you," Owen continued. "Mrs. Walsh will not be easy to win over. She has been with me for 15 years and is protective. Some of the ranch hands might give you trouble at first. And yes, people in town will talk. They always talk. But if you can handle 7 days of keeping a stubborn cowboy alive in a shed, I figure you can handle just about anything." Maggie almost smiled. "Almost. What if it does not work out?" she asked. "Then you leave. No hard feelings. I will give you a month's wages and a good reference, and you can find work somewhere else. Just like that. Just like that." Maggie studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that this was another William Hartley situation. But Owen's gray eyes were steady and clear. He meant what he said. "All right," she said. "I will try it." Owen's face broke into a genuine smile, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his whole face, erasing years of grief and loneliness. "When? Now, if you want. I do not have much to pack." Owen laughed a short bark of surprise. "Right now? Unless you have changed your mind in the last 30 seconds. No. No, I have not changed my mind." Owen gestured toward a horse tied nearby. A bay gelding, solid and calm. "Samuel lent me his horse. Duchess is still too skittish after the accident. Can you ride double? I can ride." Owen offered her his hand to help her mount. Maggie hesitated only a second before taking it. His hand was warm, calloused from years of work, and surprisingly gentle. She swung up behind the saddle and Owen mounted in front of her. "Welcome to Caldwell Ranch, Miss Brennan. Let's go home." The ride took just over an hour. They traveled north through rolling hills covered in yellow grass, past herds of longhorn cattle grazing peacefully past cedar breaks and limestone outcroppings that glowed white in the afternoon sun. Maggie had never seen land like this. Open, endless, beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Owen pointed out landmarks as they rode. "That is the north pasture. We rotate the herds through there every spring. See that line of trees? That is the creek that runs through the property. The bunkhouses are on the far side of the barn. Samuel lives in the one closest to the main house. The main house came into view as they crested a hill. Maggie's breath caught. It was beautiful. 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a wraparound porch that looked out over the land in 3 directions. Real glass windows caught the afternoon light. A red barn stood to the left, solid and well-maintained. Corrals fanned out behind it, and beyond them pastures rolled toward the horizon. "This is 12,000 acres," Maggie asked. "Every inch." Owen's voice carried a note of pride. "Bought the first 100 acres in 1873. Been building it ever since." "You built this yourself?" "Every fence post, every board in that barn. The house took me a year and a half." He paused. "Built it for my wife. But she never lived in it." There was a story there, Maggie knew. But this was not the time to ask. They rode up to the house and Owen dismounted, then helped Maggie down. Her legs were unsteady after the long ride. She had not been on a horse in months. The front door opened and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a simple brown dress and a white apron. Her face was weathered but handsome, with sharp blue eyes that took in everything at once. "Mrs. Walsh," Owen said. "This is Miss Margaret Brennan. She is going to be helping you with the house." Mrs. Walsh looked Maggie up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who had spent decades judging people's worth. "Is she now?" "Yes." Owen's voice was firm but respectful. "Miss Brennan has experience with housekeeping and nursing. She will be a valuable addition. We will see about that." Mrs. Walsh stepped aside. "You had better come in then." Maggie climbed the porch steps, very aware of her worn dress and scuffed boots. The house that had looked so beautiful from a distance now felt impossibly grand up close. This was not a place for someone like her. Owen seemed to sense her hesitation. He touched her elbow lightly. "It is just a house, Miss Brennan. Wood and nails. Nothing to be afraid of." "I am not afraid," Maggie said. She was not sure if that was true, but she said it anyway. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the outside. The front door opened into a wide hallway with polished wood floors. To the left, a parlor with leather chairs and a fireplace. To the right, a dining room with a long table that could seat 12. Straight ahead, a staircase leading to the second floor. Everything was clean, but somehow empty, like a stage set waiting for actors who never arrived. "Your room is upstairs," Owen said. "End of the hall. It is not large, but it has a good bed and a window that catches the morning light." Mrs. Walsh led the way up the stairs, her back ramrod straight. She opened a door at the end of the hallway and stood aside. Maggie stepped into the room and stopped. It was small, yes, maybe 12 feet square, but it had a real bed with a cotton mattress and a quilt folded at the foot, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small dresser, a chair by the window, and the window itself with simple muslin curtains that could be drawn for privacy. It was the most beautiful room Maggie had ever seen. "This is mine," she asked quietly. "For as long as you work here," Mrs. Walsh said. "Supper is at 6. You are expected to help in the kitchen beforehand. Breakfast is at 5. Lunch at noon. We do not tolerate laziness, and we do not tolerate sass." "Understood," Maggie said. Mrs. Walsh's expression softened just a fraction. "There are clean linens in the closet. Hot water for washing is available morning and evening. If you need anything, you ask me first. Not Mr. Caldwell." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Walsh nodded curtly and left the room. Owen lingered in the doorway. "She will warm up to you," he said. "Just give her time. And if she does not, then I will deal with it. But I do not think that will be necessary. Mrs. Walsh is tough, but she is fair. Prove yourself, and she will respect you." Maggie set her suitcase on the bed. It looked small and shabby against the clean white quilt. "I will do my best. That is all anyone can ask." Owen tipped his hat. "Welcome to Caldwell Ranch, Miss Brennan." After he left, Maggie sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave beneath her soft and yielding. She ran her hand over the quilt, feeling the tiny perfect stitches that someone had spent hours creating. For the first time in 5 weeks, she had a real bed, a real room, a door that locked. She lay back on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Footsteps downstairs, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of old wood. And for the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, Maggie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things might be all right. The first 2 weeks were hard. Mrs. Walsh ran the household with military precision and expected Maggie to keep up without complaint. Wake at 4:30. Dress. Downstairs to the kitchen by 5 to help prepare breakfast for Owen and the ranch hands. After breakfast, cleaning. Sweeping, dusting, washing windows, beating rugs. Then lunch preparation. Then more cleaning. Then supper preparation. Then dishes. Then finally, at 8 o'clock, permission to retire. Maggie had worked hard in Cedar Springs, but this was different. This was maintaining a 2-story house, cooking for 8 to 10 men daily, managing laundry for an entire household. It was exhausting. But it was also satisfying in a way the shed had never been. Here, her work mattered. When she cleaned a room, it stayed clean. When she cooked a meal, people enjoyed it. When she mended a shirt, someone thanked her. Mrs. Walsh watched her constantly for the first week, looking for any mistake, any excuse to declare Maggie unsuitable. But Maggie had been trained by her mother, who believed in doing things right the first time. She measured ingredients precisely. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed. She darned socks with stitches so small they were nearly invisible. By the end of the second week, Mrs. Walsh's scrutiny began to soften. "You learned to cook from your mother?" Mrs. Walsh asked one evening as they prepared supper together. "Yes, ma'am. She was a midwife, but she also cooked for 6 children. She taught me everything she knew." Mrs. Walsh nodded slowly. "She taught you well." It was the closest thing to a compliment Maggie had received since arriving. The ranch hands were another matter. Most of them were polite, if distant. Samuel Brooks treated her with quiet respect, often tipping his hat when they passed. Jesse Martinez was friendly, sometimes stopping by the kitchen for coffee and conversation. Cole Jesse's brother was shy but kind. But Billy "Red" O'Connor was a problem. Red was about 30, with bright red hair and a temper to match. He had worked for Owen for 5 years and clearly resented the presence of a woman he viewed as an interloper. At supper on Maggie's 4th day, Red made his opinion known. "Boss," he said loudly, "you sure about her?" Red gestured toward Maggie with his fork. "She shows up out of nowhere and suddenly she is living in your house. Seems strange to me." The table went silent. Owen set down his knife and fork with deliberate care. Red Owen's voice was quiet, but carried clear warning. "Miss Brennan is here because I trust her and because she is doing good work. If you have a problem with my decisions, you are free to find employment elsewhere." Red's face flushed darker than his hair. "I am just saying—" "I know what you are saying," Owen interrupted, "and I am telling you to stop. Miss Brennan is part of this household now. She will be treated with respect. Is that understood?" Red's jaw worked, but he nodded. "Understood, boss." The rest of supper passed in uncomfortable silence. When the men filed out afterward, Owen stopped Maggie as she began clearing dishes. "I apologize for Red. He means well, but he is suspicious of outsiders." "You do not need to apologize for your men," Maggie said. "Yes, I do. This is your home now. You should not have to defend your place in it." Maggie looked at him, surprised by the fierceness in his voice. "Thank you." Over the following weeks, a rhythm established itself. Maggie learned the house, the routines, the preferences of each man who ate at the long table. She learned that Samuel took his coffee black with 2 sugars, that Jesse liked his eggs over easy, that Owen ate whatever was put in front of him without complaint, but seemed to especially enjoy anything with cinnamon. She learned the sounds of the house, the creak of the 3rd step from the top, the way the front door stuck when it rained, the particular groan the pipes made when someone drew water upstairs. And she learned Owen Caldwell. Not through conversation. They rarely spoke beyond what was necessary. But she learned him through observation. The way he rose before dawn every morning, even Sundays. The way he walked the property each evening before supper, checking fences and cattle and land. The way he sat in his office after the ranch hands left, working on accounts by lamplight, his brow furrowed in concentration. She learned that he kept a photograph on his desk, the same photograph she had seen in his coat pocket. Catherine Morrison Caldwell. And she learned that Owen Caldwell was lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. On Sunday evening of her 4th week, Maggie found Owen sitting on the front porch after supper, a cup of coffee in his hand. She had just finished the dishes and was about to go upstairs when she saw him through the window. She hesitated, then pushed open the front door. Owen looked up surprised. "Miss Brennan, is something wrong?" "No. She faltered. "May I join you?" Owen gestured to the empty rocking chair beside his. "Please." Maggie sat her hands folded in her lap. They rocked in silence for several minutes, watching the sun sink toward the western hills. Finally, Owen spoke. "You have done well here. Mrs. Walsh told me so yesterday." "She did?" "She did. Said you are the best help she has had in 10 years. Coming from Mrs. Walsh, that is high praise." Maggie felt warmth spread through her chest. "I am glad to hear it." More silence. Comfortable this time. "Can I ask you something?" Owen said. "You may ask. Do you regret coming here?" Maggie considered the question. "No. This is the first place I have felt safe since leaving Pennsylvania." Owen nodded slowly. "Good. Because I want you to know this is not temporary. As long as you want to stay, you have a place here." "Thank you." They sat together as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear overhead, countless and bright in the way they only were far from cities. And for the first time in a very long time, Maggie felt something that might have been peace. On the morning of Maggie's 5th week at Caldwell Ranch, she rode into Cedar Springs with Mrs. Walsh to buy supplies. The general store needed 2 hours to fill the order, so Maggie decided to walk the main street while Mrs. Walsh visited the seamstress. That was when she saw him. William Hartley, or rather, the man who had called himself William Hartley. He stood outside the Red Moon Saloon talking to a young woman who could not have been more than 19. She held a small suitcase and wore a hopeful expression that Maggie recognized all too well. Maggie's feet stopped moving. Her heart began to pound. For a moment she could not breathe. The man looked older than his letters had suggested. Maybe 35. Dark hair. A beard that was more unkempt than stylish. But it was his voice that confirmed it. That smooth, reassuring tone that had convinced Maggie to trust him. "Do not worry," he was telling the young woman. "The farm is just a few miles north. We will head out there this afternoon and you will see I have told you the truth about everything." The young woman smiled, believing him, just as Maggie had believed. Maggie's shock transformed into cold fury. She started walking toward them, her hands clenched into fists. But then the man turned and saw her. For a split second, recognition flashed across his face, then panic. He grabbed the young woman's arm. "Actually, we should leave now. I just remembered I need to meet my foreman. But I thought—" Now the man said firmly, already pulling her away. "Wait!" Maggie called out. The man walked faster, practically dragging the confused young woman with him. Maggie started to follow, then stopped. She could not confront him in the middle of the street. Could not make a scene. She needed help. She ran back to where Mrs. Walsh was waiting. "Mrs. Walsh, I need to return to the ranch. Right now. It is urgent." Mrs. Walsh took one look at Maggie's face and asked no questions. "We will leave immediately." The ride back to Caldwell Ranch took 40 minutes, but it felt like hours. When they arrived, Maggie jumped down before the wagon fully stopped and ran to the barn where Owen was working. "Owen," she said breathlessly, "I need to tell you something." Owen set down the harness he had been repairing. "What is wrong, William Hartley?" "The man who lured me to Cedar Springs. I saw him in town today. He is doing it again. There was a young woman with him. He is going to steal her money just like he stole mine." Owen's expression darkened. "You are certain it was him?" "Positive. I heard his voice. He saw me and ran." "Where were they going?" "He said something about heading north. Claimed he had a farm." Maggie's voice shook with anger. "It is all lies. Everything he says is lies." Owen strode toward the house. "Samuel Jesse, get out here." The men appeared quickly. Owen explained the situation in short, clipped sentences. Then he turned to Maggie. "I need you to describe him. Everything you remember. Maggie did. Height, build, hair color, beard, clothing. Owen listened intently, then nodded to Samuel. That sounds like Frank Dodson. He has been working odd jobs around Cedar Springs for the past year. I heard he left town last month, but he must have come back. Frank Dodson? Maggie asked. His real name. Samuel's expression was grim, or at least that is what he called himself when he worked as a ranch hand up north. He was let go for stealing. Owen turned back to Maggie. Will you testify against him? Tell the sheriff what he did. Yes. Good, because we are going to stop him. Today. Within an hour, Owen had assembled a small group. Himself, Samuel, Jesse, Sheriff, Tom Bradley, and Maggie. They rode hard toward Cedar Springs, arriving just before sunset. The sheriff had sent word ahead. Frank Dodson had been located at the boarding house still with the young woman whose name was Alice. She was 19 from Missouri and had traveled to Texas after 6 months of letters from a man calling himself Charles Whitfield. Charles Whitfield. Another false name. Another woman deceived. The sheriff and Owen entered the boarding house together. Maggie waited outside with Samuel and Jesse, her heart pounding. After 10 minutes they emerged. Frank Dodson was between them, his hands bound his face, furious. Alice followed crying, supported by the boarding house owner. You cannot do this, Frank snarled. I have not done anything illegal. Owen stepped in front of him. You defrauded multiple women, took their money under false pretenses. That is called theft. Prove it. Owen looked at Maggie. She stepped forward, pulling the marriage certificate from her pocket. She had carried it with her every day, a reminder of her foolishness. This is the certificate you sent me, she said, her voice steady. Signed with the name William Hartley. That is your handwriting. Frank's eyes narrowed. So what? That does not prove anything. Owen produced 2 more certificates. Samuel had found the other women who had been defrauded. Sarah Mills from last year. Emma Carter from 2 years ago. All 3 certificates bore the same handwriting. All 3 had been signed by men with different names. 3 women, Owen said quietly. 3 different names. Same handwriting, same scheme. You are a fraud, Frank Dodson, and now you are going to pay for it. The sheriff took Frank away. Alice, still crying, thanked Maggie over and over. You saved me, she said. I would have given him everything. I know, Maggie said gently. I did the same thing. After the sheriff left, Owen walked Maggie back to where their horses waited. How do you feel? He asked. Free, Maggie said. For the first time since I got on that train in Pennsylvania, I feel free. Owen smiled. Good. That is how you should feel. They rode back to the ranch in the fading light. When they arrived, Owen helped Maggie down from her horse. Their hands touched, and neither pulled away immediately. Thank you, Maggie said, for believing me, for helping. You did not need help, Owen replied. You would have found a way to stop him yourself. I just made it easier. That night in her room, Maggie took out the marriage certificate one last time. She looked at Frank Dodson's signature at the lies written in confident ink. Then she walked downstairs to the kitchen, where the stove still burned. She opened the iron door and fed the certificate to the flames. The paper caught quickly, curling and blackening, turning to ash. When it was gone, Maggie closed the stove and went back upstairs. The weight she had carried for 6 weeks was finally completely gone. 3 months after Maggie arrived at Caldwell Ranch, autumn gave way to winter. The hills turned brown and the nights grew cold. The ranch settled into the slower rhythm of the season, and the household settled into something that felt almost like family. Mrs. Walsh had warmed to Maggie completely. She now called her Margaret instead of Miss Brennan, and had begun teaching her the more complex aspects of managing a large household. Even Red had begrudgingly accepted her presence, occasionally offering a gruff "good morning" when they passed. But the relationship between Maggie and Owen remained carefully polite. They spoke at meals. They sometimes sat together on the porch in the evenings. But there was a distance between them, a wall that neither seemed willing to cross. Until the afternoon, Owen asked Maggie to ride with him to Willow Creek. It was a Sunday, clear and cold. Owen saddled 2 horses and they rode in comfortable silence through the winter landscape. When they reached the creek, Owen dismounted and helped Maggie down. They stood on the bank looking at the place where everything had begun. 4 months ago, Owen said quietly, "I was lying right there dying. Thought my life was over. Thought there was nothing left worth fighting for." Maggie said nothing, sensing he needed to speak. "My wife died 8 years ago. Catherine." Everyone called her Kate. Owen's voice was rough with old grief. "We were married 4 years. She died before she could live in the house I built for her." "I saw her photograph," Maggie said softly. "In your office." Owen nodded. "After she died, I threw myself into work, built the ranch, made money, became successful. But I was not living. I was just not dying." He turned to face Maggie. "Until you found me." "Owen, let me finish. Please." He took a breath. "These 4 months having you at the ranch, it is the first time since Kate died that I have wanted to wake up in the morning. The first time I have looked forward to coming home at the end of the day. The first time I have felt like maybe, just maybe, I could be more than a man haunted by ghosts." Maggie's throat tightened. She did not trust herself to speak. "I am not good at this," Owen continued. "Samuel would tell you I am about as romantic as a fence post. But I need you to know." He paused. "I love you, Margaret Brennan. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you never give up. I love that you saw a dying stranger and saved him without asking for anything in return. I love who I am when I am with you." Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks. No one had ever said those words to her. No one had ever looked at her the way Owen was looking at her now, like she was valuable, like she mattered. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything. Just let me be here for you the way you were there for me." Maggie reached out and took his hand. "Owen, I came to Texas looking for a home, for someone who would want me, and I thought William Hartley was that person, but he was not real." She squeezed his hand. "You are real." Owen pulled her close, and Maggie went willingly. They stood together on the bank of Willow Creek, holding each other as the winter sun sank lower in the sky. After a long moment, Owen stepped back slightly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a ring. Gold, simple, elegant. Engraved on the inside were the initials KMC and a date from 1873. "This was Kate's ring," Owen said. "I gave it to her when we married." "I want you to have it." Maggie hesitated. "Owen, I cannot take... Kate would want me to be happy, and you make me happy." He held the ring out. "Margaret Brennan, will you marry me? Not because you need a home, not because I need a housekeeper, but because I love you, and I want to spend whatever years I have left trying to deserve you." Maggie looked at the ring, then at Owen's face, at the hope and vulnerability there. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Owen slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The guests were few: Samuel and Mrs. Walsh, Jesse and Cole, a handful of ranch hands, the sheriff, Alice, the young woman Maggie had saved, and 3 other women who had been defrauded by Frank Dodson. Even Red came wearing his best shirt and offering Maggie a gruff but sincere congratulations. The local minister performed the ceremony on the front porch of the house Owen had built for Kate, but this time it was not a monument to grief. It was a home. When the minister asked if Owen would take Maggie as his wife, Owen said, "I will, and I promise to honor, cherish, and protect her until my last breath." When he asked if Maggie would take Owen as her husband, she said clearly, "I will." And this time it is real. Everyone laughed gently, understanding the weight behind those words. That night, Owen led Maggie to the master bedroom. She had never been inside before. It was larger than she expected, with a big oak bed, a fireplace, and windows overlooking the ranch. On the dresser was Kate's photograph, but next to it now was a photograph of Maggie taken the week before. "I will never forget her," Owen said quietly. "But I am not living in the past anymore. I am living now. With you." Maggie took his hand. "I do not want you to forget her. She was part of making you who you are." They stood together looking at the two photographs, the past and the present, the grief and the new beginning. Then Owen turned to Maggie and smiled. "Welcome home, Mrs. Caldwell." 6 months passed. Spring came to Texas, painting the hills in green and gold. Maggie stood in the garden behind the house, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding a trowel. She was 5 months along now, the baby growing strong inside her. Owen appeared beside her, carrying a bucket of water. "The doctor said you should rest," he reminded her gently. "I am resting," Maggie replied, not looking up from the rose bush she was planting. "This is restful." Owen smiled and set the bucket down. He knelt beside her, his hand covering hers on the trowel. "Let me help." They worked together in comfortable silence, the way they did everything now. When the rose bush was planted, Owen helped Maggie to her feet. They walked to the porch and sat in the rocking chairs, hand in hand, looking out over the land. "Thank you," Maggie said softly. "For what?" "For this." She gestured at the house, the land, but then placed her hand over his heart. "For this home. Not this building. This." Owen brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You already had it," he said. "You just needed to find your way back." They sat together as the afternoon sun warmed the porch, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Owen Caldwell finished his story as the sun set over the Texas hills. His grandson Tommy sat across from him, eyes wide with wonder. "And that is how I met your grandmother," Owen said. "She saved my life twice, once when I was dying, once when I had stopped really living." Tommy looked toward the house where Maggie was moving around in the kitchen. She was 67 now, her brown hair gone gray, but her green eyes were as sharp as ever. "That is the most romantic story I have ever heard, Grandpa." Owen laughed. "Your grandmother would say it is just practical. She saw a problem and fixed it. That is who she is. But you loved her. From the moment I really saw her, standing in that shed refusing to take my money even though she was starving, I knew then she was different from anyone I had ever met." The front door opened and Maggie stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "You are filling that boy's head with stories again," she said, but she was smiling. "They are true stories," Owen protested. "That does not mean they are not filling his head." Maggie sat down in the rocking chair beside Owen. "Supper will be ready in 20 minutes. Tommy stood. "I should wash up. Thank you for the story, Grandpa." After the boy went inside, Owen took Maggie's hand. He still wore his wedding band. She still wore Kate's ring. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked. Saying yes to a beat-up cowboy who did not know how to say pretty things? Maggie squeezed his hand. "Not once. You gave me something William Hartley never could. What is that real home? A real life. Real love." She looked out over the ranch, the 12,000 acres that stretched to the horizon, and a story worth telling. They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, who had built a life from pain and loneliness and the simple choice to be kind to a stranger, and that Owen would later tell his great-grandchildren was the real secret, not grand gestures or perfect words, just choosing to be kind, choosing to stay, choosing love when it would have been easier to walk away. Because sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with a journey to somewhere new, but with the decision to save a life, and in doing so, save your own.